In the musical Fiddler on the Roof, Tevye has a very honest conversation with God that he sings. And he says, "Oh Lord, you made many, many poor people. I realize, of course, it's no shame to be poor, but it's no great honor either. So what would have been so terrible if I had had a small fortune?" And then he sings that lovely refrain, "If I were a rich man, all day long I'd bitty bitty bum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work." And this is what he says he would do if he were a rich man. "I'd build a big tall house with rooms by the dozen right in the middle of town. A fine tin roof with real wooden floors below. There would be one long staircase going up, just for going up, and one even longer for coming down, and one more leading nowhere, just for show." And then he goes on to say, "That's what I do at my house, but this is what else I do. The most important men in town would come to fawn on me, and they would ask me advice, as if I were Solomon. 'If you please, Reb Tevye, pardon me, Reb Tevye,' posing problems that would cross a rabbi's eye. And it won't make one bit of difference if I answer right or wrong. When you're rich, they think you really know it." And then he goes on to say, "If I were a rich man, I'd have the time I lack to sit in the synagogue and pray, and maybe have a seat by the Eastern Wall. And I'd discuss the holy books with the learned men several hours every day. And that would be the sweetest of all." And he concludes his conversation with God, this very honest, real conversation with God, how comfortable he is with God. And he says, "Lord, who made the lion and the lamb, you decreed I should be what I am. Would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I were a wealthy man?" And I think sometimes we ask ourselves that only if this had happened or if that had happened. Tevye presents this to God as one of his values. He'd really like to be rich and do all of these things. But as we see through the play, his other values appear. He looks at his son and daughter who are growing. The daughter is ready to be married. And he looks at them and says, "Sunrise, sunset, is this the little girl I carried? Is this the little boy at play? I don't remember growing older. When did they?" And we ask ourselves the same question. Where did the years go by? And he has a very lovely concept. He says, "Seedlings turn overnight to sunflowers and blossoming as they gaze." And then he concludes with, "One season following another, swiftly fly the years, laden with happiness and tears." So Tevye has a real look on life about how quickly the years go by and how important his family is to him. That shows another of his values. He also talks about, because he, at that time, his own marriage was a prearranged one, as was the custom. And his daughter, who tries to escape the matchmaker, really falls in love with someone, and they marry because of love. And Tevye says to his wife Goldie one day, "Do you love me? Even if it's a prearranged marriage," is what he's saying. "Do you really love me?" And so they have a discussion about that. And so we see in Tevye these wonderful values coming through, this value of family and friends and love and comfortableness with God, wonderful relationship with God. And I see in that the echoes of Jesus saying, "Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing?" I think this story about the sparrows and the lilies of the field is really God's invitation to us. He's not concerned about the worry part as much as it's an invitation to trust. Now you look again at the sparrows. Yes, God will provide for them, but who does the searching for the seeds? Who searches for the twigs to make the nest? Who flaps their wings when it's time for migration? God doesn't do that for them. They do it for themselves because that's part of their makeup. That's who they are. And that's their responsibility. And God will take care of the rest. And look at the lilies of the field. Stationary, stuck in place, wherever it is. The rain and the wind and the storms. And what do? What is their job? They take in that nourishment, whatever form it comes in, and they give back fragrance and beauty. So with this invitation to trust God also comes the responsibilities, because God will not do for us what we can do for ourselves and what we need to do for ourselves. And so God is not this big sandwich dispenser in the sky, you know, put in a few nickels and out comes what I need. That we are called to this responsibility, and it's a beautiful one. So in this call to trust, not trust in God, but to trust God, there's a difference. Because to say I trust in God is a theological concept, and it needs to go deeper within us. And this story is a beautiful invitation to go deeper. God says, trust me. Do what is yours to do, and I will take care of the rest, whatever form that is. Trust is the first step, but it brings us further. Archbishop Buddy, who is bishop in Washington, D.C., has this to say. She says, a relationship with God isn't defined by correct beliefs, but rather a willingness to trust, which we're called to do. And, she says, step out in faith. What does that mean? And again, there's a difference between saying, I believe in God, and saying, I believe God, right here, right now, in my life, where I am and what's going on. I believe God. That's a big difference. So how do you develop that? One story you might think about is Abraham and Sarah. Remember, they were both very old. They had had no children. And these strangers appear at the tent. And they say to Abraham, you know, we'll be back in a year. And at that time, Sarah will have given birth to a son. And of course, Sarah overhears it and laughs about it. She says, me, an old woman. That's an example of Abraham did not believe in God. He believed God. He did what he needed to do. And God took care of the rest. And sure enough, they had their son. So this God who calls us not to doctrines and laws, but to a loving relationship. How do we put that into action? How do we live faith and believe God? I think about several stories in the New Testament where, especially around Easter time, Jesus with the disciples, Jesus walks with the disciples on the way to Emmaus. They don't recognize him. He's there walking with them, and eventually they do. Magdalene at the tomb, the empty tomb, someone stands by her. She thinks it's the gardener, and it's really Jesus. He calls her by name. Remember the story of the disciples in the boat where they were in a storm? And Jesus says, "Oh, you of little faith." In other words, do you not recognize the presence of God in the midst of this? And the man who asked Jesus to cure his son, he said, "I believe, help my unbelief." So I'm wondering, is every struggle that we get into, when we don't exactly know what's going on, which they didn't in these stories, is that a call to recognize the presence of God? Is it? And if it is, how can that become a part of us? In the Lord's Prayer, we say, "Give us this day our daily bread." That's kind of general. What if, in those circumstances in our life, when, let's say, somebody unexpected drops in and we haven't seen them for years and years, and of course we had already planned to do something else, we drop everything to be hospitable. Or you're working on something and it just does not work out. Or you meet with someone and you start to get into an argument. Where is God in the presence of all of that? Can you stop, just take a breath, and say to yourself, the translation from the Aramaic, "Give us this day our daily bread," just say, "Grow through us, Holy One, this moment's bread and wisdom. Grow through us this moment's bread and wisdom." Try it. The next time something unexpected comes up, the next time you get in a sticky situation, just pause for a moment. Take a quick breath, and in that breathing say, "Grow through us this moment's bread and wisdom," so that you're developing that relationship, that recognition of the presence of God, not only within you, but within the situation and within a person, if that happens to be the situation. Or it may be in a daily task when you have had it with washing the dishes or cooking or cleaning or going grocery shopping or whatever it is. That moment, grow through us. You and me, God, you and these people around me, grow through us this moment's bread and wisdom. I recognize you are here, but I don't sense it. You seem far away, but I'm going to say it anyway. Grow through us this moment's bread and wisdom. That's easier said than done, and it takes practice. And I guarantee you it'll be worth your while. Antonio Machado, who is a Spanish poet, says this: "Traveler, there is no path. Paths are made by walking." And so as you journey forward in faith, remember that. There's really no path. You're making it as you walk and as you journey and as you take the opportunity to recognize the presence of the Holy with you. That's an inner work that you're doing. There's also more inner work that's related to our present social political environment these days. And sometimes I'm sure you feel like you are whitewater rafting. There's no control over it. It's very dangerous. You can turn over and get dunked in the water. What about that? You might ask yourself, how does this help me clarify my values? How am I being grateful for what I have instead of ungrateful for what I don't have? St. Augustine says, hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see they do not remain as they are. Work to be done. How do you transform that anger into courage to see that things do not remain the same? And remember Dr. Martin Luther King, hatred does not drive out hatred. Focus your energy on what brings light and love into the world. Mark Nepo, who studied Buddhism for years and years, is now probably in his 60s or 70s, and he has written several books. When he was 30, he developed cancer, a very serious, rare kind of cancer, and was many times on the verge of death. And he said, when he first got the diagnosis and when he first went to the doctors, he said, I had nothing wrong with me all that time. He said, I'm the kind of person, when you sit in the doctor's room, I say, ouch, before I'm even touched. And he had to learn to face his fear. He said that was his greatest thing, facing the fear and the suffering, but mainly the fear. And he struggled with that. He said he was just didn't know what to do exactly. And he said one night in one of his restless dreams, a poet from long ago China in the 700s AD appeared in his dream. And the poet's name was Tu Fu. And he appeared in the dream, and he was sitting on the sand, sitting cross-legged on the sand, and very delicately scratching with a branch, scratching the sand in front of him, this prophet. And he said in his dream, he crept up to him, to Tu Fu, and he said, how do I block the fear? And the prophet continued scratching on the ground, and he said, he became angry, and he said, how do I block the fear? And the prophet lifted his hand with the branch, and he said, how does a tree block the wind? It doesn't, does it? It allows the wind to blow through. And he said, that's one of the ways that he coped with fear and suffering, continues to cope with fear and suffering. He said he lets it blow through. And how he does that is, he said, he recognizes it, that he's being fearful. He takes a breath, sounds like something Steve would be, has encouraged us to do. Takes a deep breath and lets it go, lets the fear go. And he said, just do it for 1 second. And the next time you become conscious of the fear, do it for 2 seconds or 3. And he said, gradually, you develop that ability to let it flow through you, just like a swimmer strengthens his lungs by swimming and learning to breathe. So that's another way of coping with life. And Nepal goes on to say, we continue to stay devoted to the difficult and beautiful journey of being human. I think all of those stories, all of those examples are contained in Jesus talking about the sparrow and the lilies of the field. So we have an invitation to trust God while remembering that God does not do for us what we need to do for ourselves. It's an invitation to awareness of the presence of God. As we grow in our ability to recognize God with us, and we pray, grow through us this moment's bread and wisdom as we struggle to recognize God's presence. And so we also look at one other thing. You'll notice at the end of the reading, Jesus says, "So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own." And again, the emphasis is not on don't worry. The emphasis is on trust and do what needs to be done. And he says, today's trouble is enough today, which translated means living faithfully is a large enough task for today. So if you have spent your day facing reality as best you can with trust and faith, then let the rest go when it's time for you to sleep. Tomorrow, God will also provide for you and give you strength to recognize the presence of the Holy with you always, no matter what. Amen.